So we are here for our awakening. We are here for every present moment of whatever our experience is on the human journey to connect with spiritual truth and with who and what we really are, and to activate the life of our vision, to activate the life of our imagining, to activate the life that we know within us is existent, and to let it flower out among us. Seems a lot easier to say and to put into beautiful flowery language than to do, yeah? Sometimes? I was talking to a friend recently about courage. You know, courage doesn't always look pretty, right? Courage sounds so good. So does strength. It sounds so good. So does love, actually. Fill in the blanks, keep going. But sometimes as you are embodying it, presencing it, getting there, dragging yourself from what is unlike courage into courage, it doesn't look so pretty. It doesn't feel so good. So, who has a gap in their life, a gap between what is and where they'd like to be? Who's ever experienced that in the past? Who's experiencing some of it now? Yeah. Who thinks the world is just how it should be? I mean, who thinks there's a gap when it comes to Ukraine and Russia and what's going on with world peace and harmony and stability? Is there a gap? Massive, right? So now, when I meet with my best Buddhist friend, who runs the Temple Buddhist Center in Kansas City, we have these discussions, you know, and I bring a little bit more of the unity perspective, and he brings more of the Buddhist perspective, but we're also very much in sync. But one place that it still brings, it just brings us to this place where we're just talking, is this piece on what the world is, what this experience is, because from the Buddhist perspective, it's like, this is what happens. This is life. This is the human condition. This is what has always been happening. So what we see in our lives and in our world, like there has never been a time there's not conflict, right? There's never been a time there's not war. There's never been a time there's not the yin and yang, right? So his work and his practice is helping people to not struggle with that as much, but to come from the grounded practice, right? And then in unity, we have a bit of this, like, we can acknowledge that it is. Sometimes unity teachings can lead people into interesting places where they can even look at suffering and go, oh, it's all good, it's all God. But the truth is we have a couple of practices in unity, and one is order, divine order. And that can be misunderstood. A lot of people think divine order is looking at anything, even if it's causing great suffering, even if it's very difficult, even if you fill in the blank. And they'll say, divine order, it's divine order. So we'll find out later how it was divine order, but you'll know, it's almost like the translation when something really happens that feels just horrible and awful. It happens in a way that our souls don't think this is supposed to happen, and I won't get too much into examples that would bring us to our knees, but do you know what I'm talking about? Things that you're just like, that's not right. That just turns over everything, and it just rips my heart over. Well, traditional Christianity and traditional religious practice can say, oh, God needed that person in heaven, or, it's all for good. And in unity, our own kind of misapplication of the principle and the law is to just say, oh, divine order. When we see big inequalities, when we see systems that are corrupt, when we see things that just hurt, and I think that's the mind's need to try to make things okay, to try to say, to try to get into almost the Buddhist practice of your option is to be with what is, and to not resist it, right? Because that's the Buddhist practice. It's like, don't resist what is unless you want to be in suffering and hell. Because you really don't have another option, right? And I'm going to the place where both are true, right? If we can breathe through the discomfort and the mind's need to say, which one's right? What do I do? Let go of all that. We're just on the path together in this moment. But in unity, that idea of order is sometimes misunderstood and misapplied. People look at it and go, oh, divine order. In fact, what divine order is an interactive process. It is a co-creation. It's not just that God does something and then we just go, oh, well, like that must have been good because God did it and it happened. No, divine order is calling forth order. It's stepping into something and saying, I, through my conscious awareness, I, through my power to co-create, I, through my being of what I am on this planet Earth, will be in the space to call forth order. I will be the order because my perception, my perspective, my being knows this divine faculty, knows my ability, knows who and whose I am. I will step forth and I will create order. I will be the order. I will call it forth. And when we step into that, we call it forth and we become part of it, right? We acknowledge that love is everywhere present, that intelligence, infinite intelligence is everywhere present. We acknowledge that abundance is everywhere present, but it's not standing in the middle of lack and going, there's not lack there because God's good and divine order. So like, even though there's nothing on your table, it's all good, buddy. Like, even though this is happening to Black America, it's all good. Even though this is happening in Ukraine and Russia, divine order. Can you feel that? Can you feel like something missing the mark there? But we do it. It's a misapplication of the principles. What divine order is and what God as love is that we are not separate from God. We are not separate from God energy. We are not separate from divine intelligence. What it is standing in the midst of something, in the midst of what the Buddhist would say, being with what is. And it's not resisting what happened. It's not taking the present moment and either trying to say, if I look at this long enough, it will not have happened, right? Like, it will not have happened. It's not happening. It's not looking at something that's happening or looking at what is and denying it and acting like it's not there. It's denying the negative power it might have. It's knowing that everything is a spectrum of possibilities and potentialities. It's knowing that someone can have one experience and it could ruin the rest of their lives. They can also have that one experience and birth insanely incredible love. Birth in amazing, spectacular things that never could have been born if that event had not happened. Not necessarily calling that event good, but doing something with it, right? It's stepping into order, saying, even in the midst of this, I know God is everywhere present. I know light is everywhere present. I know love is everywhere present. And so I will birth that forth. Let me be a part of that birthing. Let me hold the space for that birthing. So what that looks like in Ukraine today is looking at the amazing things that are coming out of this, not calling any of what we see as far as the human suffering good, but looking at the wake-up call that's happening in people, looking at the wake-up call that's happening for democracy, looking at the wake-up call that's happening in the human condition. And when we talk about something like that on a global scale, we're also experiencing all bits and pieces of it in a personal way, on an individual level. And metaphysics and mysticism helps us go in with an open heart, with transparency, vulnerability, and authenticity to the experience of what it is like in the human condition. But that idea of there is a gap, the gift, I think, in Eastern traditions is that they give all of us the greatest key and the greatest gift, which is to not have to go into what we call metaphysical malpractice and just look at something that feels awful or that is awful and say, okay, it's good. But it allows us to just be with what is, to take out the resistance so that we can feel the true power, so that we can actually listen. We're no longer fighting with the past, trying to change the past, but we are really being so present to what is that we are releasing all the attachments, we are releasing all of the ideas so that all of our energy and all of our focus can be right here with what is, so that we can be inspired, so that we can step into right action, so that we can co-create the best and highest option out of what the current what is. So that gap that we experience as part of the human condition may always be there. Some teachings explain it as the creative force, the creative faculty, the creative gap, right? Like if there wasn't a difference between where we want to be and where we are, there might not be the same experience that draws us forward, that shifts things, that makes change, right? If you're thinking about a chemical experience, if there's not some sort of a reaction, you don't get the change. There are also spiritual practices like these Eastern traditions that can bring us into a place where we don't have to experience the chemical reaction as so much suffering and so much friction, because we can step back from our attachment and our judgment, and then that allows us to step into our new thought practice, into our unity practice of presencing everything that is. Presencing it in the now moment, in real time, in a state of allowing, which doesn't mean passive. It doesn't mean not acting. It doesn't mean not co-creating a new future or a different reality. So the big distinction in unity is unity kind of takes it one step further and says, and then we got a vision. So we got to not only just be with what is and let go of the suffering, because once we've got that energy back, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? I have a beloved friend that is in the 8 O's, and we've been talking recently, and one of the things that I've been encouraging is to really be looking at what the vision is. Never at any time and stage in our lives should we stop looking at the future, almost like strategic visioning for our lives. Really look at it. Really don't take the assumption that you know what's going to be and you know what's going to happen and you know what you have, but just look at it as if everything is malleable in your experience. And what are you going to vision? Has anyone ever visioned how they want to lift off? We call it transitioning into your freedom form. Visioning that. Has anyone loosened things in their lives that they thought they really couldn't change, that they thought would be the same forever, but then you realized, you had an epiphany, and you realized, actually, I make all this up. I make all this up. Do you realize how much we make up? You know, even in our society today, and certainly in the United States of America, we make some things up and we forget to make them up. We pay people a certain amount of money for this kind of job and a certain amount of money for this kind of job. You know, we could have just plopped onto the planet and created a whole different system. It could have been like, you're a whole human, I'm a whole human. Whatever I want to do with my hour has that much value. Whatever you want to do with your hour has that much value. If you're offering up your hour, all of our hours are equal. All hours are created equal. That was an option. It's still an option. You know what our minds will say? No, it's not. There's no way it's an option. What if it were an option that we all chose right now? I mean, could you just imagine? Like, take every hour and every benefit for the hour, and it's like all hours are created equal. Woo. We forget that we create these things, and then we live within them, and we call them cages. And we give other people or systems or paradigms or governments the key to the cages. And then we sit within the cage going, how do I get out of this? How did this happen? So let's talk about closing the gap practically. Have you ever woken up and for whatever reason realized you needed to find yourself again? That you need to have some strategic visioning for your life, or that there's a you that's wanting to emerge that is not fully here, and you want to go on the exploration, the journey of discovering that you and giving her more space, more time, more authority. Yes? The first question is, who are you? Who are you? How often do we ask ourselves that? Who am I? Ukraine is asking that question today. Russia's defining that question through their actions today. UVC, Unity Village Chapel, is posed with that question, with shifts going on. Who are we? Who am I? If we can consciously go into that conversation with ourselves, that journal, that dialogue, there is richness there. Closing the gap can feel insurmountable. It can feel like, how can I? Like, I always thought of a nonprofit. If I ever had millions of dollars, I'd do this nonprofit, and I would call it Auntie M's after my aunt that lives in Colorado, because she always gave me the option of coming back to her place. So when I was a teacher, I used to be an educator, and I would have off for the summers, and I would move out of my apartment, and I would move to Auntie M's. And she always had a room for me, and she had a little storage shed, and I could put my stuff in there. And that gave me the space to think. It gave me the space to be and to realize whether or not I wanted to stay on the path I was on or shift to a new one. But many of us don't have the space, do we? I mean, we're continually faced with life, and the pace of life is sometimes so intense that for whatever reason, maybe it's finances, maybe it's time, maybe it's whatever resources, it can feel hard to just have the space to think and regroup and make a different decision. That's one of the things I would do if I was a millionaire. I would create a virtual space and physical space called Auntie M's, and anyone could book 3 to 6 months there to have all their needs met and taken care of, to have a full grocery cupboard so that they could think, so that they could process, so that they could get support in being about what their highest purpose and highest calling is. Because a lot of times what happens, people just start getting onto the roll with work, right? The roll, and then there's kids, and then there's family, and then there's health issues, and there's this, and there's that, and you fill in the blank, whatever it is, and it doesn't even feel like sometimes you can even take a moment to think about what you would want to think about if you had the time to make the choice to do something different. And it's painful to see people you love and people of power going through that, isn't it? It's painful to see people with gifts not being able to use them. It's painful to witness a generation of young people with insane intelligence, creativity, and vision that are saddled with student loans for years and years on end, with jobs that demand every second, with health insurance and bills and systems of building credit that one by one put up bars. And where is their creativity? Where is their vision? Where is the life they've imagined? Seemingly between those bars. That's painful to see. Howard Thurman said, don't ask yourself what the world needs, ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. I live by that. I live by that. The second we are not feeling our aliveness anymore, we are not feeling ourselves, it doesn't matter what happens on the outside. There are no rules. There are no rules about how we do this life. So many of the rules that we think are important are totally imagined, or they are created by someone else, and we only have to operate by them when we give our buy-in. Sure, it may seem insurmountable, but what does spiritual practice and spiritual principle tell us about how to free ourselves? Well, often we're faced with the unexpected. We're faced with what feels like destructive. We're faced with loss. We can see it all around on our planet, and we can see it within ourselves. Unexpected change, loss, death, whatever it is, an accident, whatever it is, something we call wrong. We're faced with disappointment, things that are discouraging, change through manipulation, change through coercion, change through powers that be. We're faced with just shift just appearing, whether it's our age, whether it's our life circumstance, whether it's our profession, our relationships, whether it's just presencing something new starting to emerge in us, through us, as us. The shift appears. We see something different emerging, something different unfolding, and we feel like we want to invest our power or invest in something else. We want to start birthing more authenticity, more freedom, more wholeness. We want to honor that. Like there's something growing, and I can tell it needs more of my time and my attention, my energy, my thoughts, my emotion. I'm feeling called to align with it. How do I do that? What steps do I take? Well, the first is that deep step of asking, who are you? Who are you? Who are you without the labels? Who are you without the conditions? Who are you without the systems? Who are you without any of the limitations? Really, who are you? And breathing into a practice around that, a practice that supports you feeling that. For some of us, that's getting out in nature with the quiet, with the sounds of the birds. It's going into meditation and having time in silence. It's having time looking at a valley or a field or touching the water. It's time in reading and contemplation. It's time on a walk. For some people, it's time golfing. I think that golfing for some people is like meditation for others. But how can we give who we are more love and more space in our hearts and in our lives? Because all of these things, dealing with the unexpected, dealing with the gap of what is, dealing with the disappointment, the shift, all of that is part of the human condition. It's part of the walk. And we are here by divine appointment during the Easter season, the Easter time, not because Easter is a religious holiday or a celebration that we engage in because of religion. Easter is a walk. It's a walk that was just as much spiritually relevant 2,000 years ago as it is right now, because it's a metaphysical walk and it's a metaphysical awakening. And this walk that we're talking about, it was a walk that was taken by the master teacher, Jesus, the Christed one, the one who demonstrated his Christ, who knew who he was. It's a walk that was engaged by and demonstrated by the Buddha. They experienced all of this. The Buddha let go of his identity as this prince, right? As this one of great inheritance. When he saw the suffering, he saw the discord, he saw the inequality, he saw the gap. And Jesus, the master teacher, saw the gap. And then he saw the suffering of the human condition and saw how we lead ourselves into darkness. And he paved the way for people to understand the true spiritual conditions and the true spiritual workings that underlie everything. People left and right were trying to get Jesus, the master teacher, to demonstrate power, control, and authority, and to fix everything on the physical level. Let's do it, buddy. I am behind you. Let's walk in there and get them. And what did the master teacher do? He taught us mindfulness. He taught us about who we are. And even just that, teaching us who and whose we are and about our true spiritual power, got him killed. It wasn't bearing arms that got him killed. It wasn't building an army for attack. It wasn't stripping the leaders of the time of their human and worldly power. It was going under the radar and speaking to truth. It was letting humanity know what's available to us in each and every moment. That's where the real power is. That's where the real power was. Ego wants to resolve and solve everything with the concepts of right and wrong, with control, manipulation, dominance, force, war, discord, discontent. But soul and spirit resolves it through communion, communication, connection. Let's take a moment to breathe into a time of meditation together. To just presence, a loosening up within us. To presence the practice, the power in knowing who we are. Inhaling and exhaling. Arriving so fully right here and right now. That we allow ourselves to breathe into one identity, our spiritual identity, letting all of the other circumstances and situations and labels or roles just float away for a moment. We bring all of our energy, our awareness, our intention into the field of this moment. Just giving a deep sigh of release and relief. Trusting that we do not have to engage in judgments of right or wrong, that we do not have to control or manipulate things to go our way, that we don't have to build up resources to dominate or force anything. The greatest spiritual teachers, those who've demonstrated the most wisdom, breathe into true power. Power that comes through authenticity, transparency, vulnerability, honesty, integrity. It may seem simple, but spiritual practice and spiritual principle is often simple. It's often not complicated. And it's always immediately available. So we breathe into that. And whatever it is that we feel like has the appearance of bars around us, locking us in or jailing us in, or wherever we see that and we see limitation in the world around us, whether it's the environment, whether it's world peace, whether it's these systematic issues, see the prison for a moment. And then bring in the light. As the light shines on those steel metal bars, it just illuminates and shines right through them. They dissolve in the light of who and whose we are. We stand for a vision emerging. We stand in our true nature, knowing the greatest teachers, the master teacher, and the greatest teachers of all times taught us that our emancipation was right here and right now in knowing who we are. So we breathe into that, giving our energy to our vision, trusting in who and whose God is. That is who love is, who intelligence is, who order is when you call it forth, who good is when you declare it in the midst of anything and everything. Not labeling outer circumstances, not labeling the realm of form, but labeling the substance available and true within everything. Labeling that good. God is the good that comes from. All of that is the emerging paradigm of oneness that will always find itself within everything, even when human eyes can't see it. It will penetrate every field of suffering. It will illuminate every seeming setback or limitation. it exists as potential and is ours to call forth. Inhaling and exhaling. We contemplate the words of Richard Rohr, the contemplative teacher, when he says, when we get into presence, we find someone is not against us, but someone who is definitely for us. Someone who is for me more than I am for myself. We find the spiritual truth of being, that this someone, this God, is not a person with preferences and with an agenda to dominate or manipulate or control. But God is the beauty that is beyond our capacity to even begin to put into words. God is the intelligence that is more magnificent than we have ever seen fully demonstrated. God is the light and the love that we have just put the tips of our toes into the living waters of. Because God is wholeness. And the more we practice and see this wholeness, the more we become aware, the more we realize that we are in, we move, we have our being within this Godness. And as that awareness grows within us, it becomes not only our experience, but it becomes something that goes before us in the world of creation. And where two or more are gathered, there am I. May this Easter journey be our journey. May we walk hand in hand with our transformation in one hand and our awakening in the other hand. Not feeling powerless in a world of change, but knowing our true selves and our divine birthright and calling forth wholeness on each step of the journey. Namaste.